You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christie Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Welcome to the final solo show of this month's series on marriage, intimacy, and mental health. This past Wednesday, I aired an episode with Dr. Christie Kederian. If you missed it, make sure you go back and check it out. It was so fun chatting with her about matchmaking and asking her all of my questions from watching The Millionaire Matchmaker back in the day, watching Patty Stanger do her thing. She's also a Jersey girl. Love it. And it was super interesting to learn more about Dr. Christie's Armenian matchmaking program and to really just get a better understanding of what true non-TV matchmaking is. So if you missed it, make sure you go back and check it out. On a more serious note, Dr. Christie gave me a lot to think about. Even though I am no longer dating, her points about relationship health, longevity, what to look for in a partner, they apply. You know, I appreciated how much emphasis was placed on doing the individual inner work in order to better your relationship, whether it be that you're looking for a relationship or you're already in one. You know, in my experience in therapy, whenever my marriage is a topic of discussion, you know, it started out as me asking my therapist, is it enough for my marriage for the long haul that I am the only one in therapy? Because I was starting to see what I was doing as having an impact on the relationship, but I was not totally sure, still questioning what this would mean. Then it moved to, well, why am I the one in therapy? Why am I doing all this work? You know, shouldn't he be doing it too? And of course he is in his own way, but to be in that really deep throes of personal growth, and he certainly wasn't meeting with a therapist once a week, or at points I was meeting with her twice a week. And so really just like a little resentful, truthfully. And then eventually getting to this place of, holy cow, this is incredible. I get to do all this work on myself and it helps my marriage. And this is really cool. Like, there was a huge part of me that was totally nerding out on how cool it is that all the things that you read in the books about relationships and personal growth, when you actually do them, they happen. But also just, I mean, totally empowering and just feeling really amazing about it. So I went from questioning to resentment to empowerment. And I feel like that's a pretty common tale, but you don't know it until you know it. So I also want to touch on the part of the conversation with Dr. Christie where we discussed chemistry. Dr. Christie shared how chemistry can feel differently for the same person in different relationships. So sometimes it's this positive, inexplicable vibe or spark, and other times you might be feeling something inexplicable because it's familiar and comfortable. And she talked about this perhaps not always being a positive thing. She also says that sometimes this is our subconscious relating to a person in a similar way that we related to our parents. And as you can imagine, this can probably be in both very overwhelmingly positive ways and at times, unfortunately, very overwhelmingly negative ways. So cliches like, oh, you marry your mother or you marry your father are coming to mind. And funny enough, this week in therapy, I started exploring the possibility and the idea that my therapist brought to my attention that sometimes we seek out and end up with partners who are similar to our parents in one way or another, not just as like a fun fact, this is comfortable, but because it's another opportunity to work through the dynamic. And again, this is all subconscious, which on one hand, again, I have to say is pretty freaking cool, but also taxing and just pretty exhausting to think about, which is exactly what I told my therapist. I'm like, so you're telling me that the aspects of my parental relationships that I struggled with as a kid, but may not have even known that I was really struggling with them as a kid because you don't process things the same, are this some of the same ways that I relate to my husband, so that now it's like I can take a second crack at processing and dealing with them? Like, yeah, no thanks. Next question. But we all know that I don't really mean no thanks. I don't really mean next question. We know that I mean that, yes, this sounds like a boatload of work and it sounds pretty tiring, but it also makes too much sense to ignore. And it also makes sense that even on a very subconscious level, I'd want to work through them. And when I take myself all the way down the rabbit hole, how amazing to know that I will work through and process all of this stuff, and how light and freeing will that be? Like, this is like what's really the best and the worst thing about therapy. That is that if I wasn't in therapy, I probably would have gone my whole life just thinking about how my partner and his similarities or differences to my parents are just these funny, interesting things. And I probably, for the most part, would have been just like fine with that. But because of therapy, it all comes out. Everything comes to the surface, which right now in this moment feels like, oh my gosh, did we really have to figure this out? Did we really have to make these connections? But I know that ultimately, even if these are subconscious feelings, they're impacting me. So it can only benefit me to unpack them. It can only benefit me in working through it. And as you work through it, whatever it is, just in my experience with past things, so to speak, you do realize how heavy something does actually weigh on you, even if it is subconscious. It's the best and worst thing. So that'll be fun for me for the next however long, figuring out what I'm working through with my husband that actually comes from my childhood. Cool. Yeah, I feel like that's some real textbook therapy stuff right there. And I'm super excited to get into it. But anyway, the best part about all of this, including many of the points of discussion with Dr. Christie, is that you have the power. You have the power to change yourself, to change your relationship, to cultivate or call in a new one. Wherever you are in life, it really is true that you have everything you need inside of you to attract, create, or sustain a healthy, loving, long-lasting relationship, if that's what you desire. All right, so if you're listening to this in real time, this is the very last day to sign up to get the recording of the live Zoom panel that was held this past Wednesday with Dr. Morgan, Dr. Lex, and Dr. Christie. If you want to see the recording of that, go to sasssays.com/panel to sign up and get your copy. And come back next week because I'm launching a new series for the month of July on motherhood, pregnancy, and mental health. All right, that's all I've got. I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.